AWS-FM, Voice of the Shoe Swap at 93.7 on your radio dial. We are broadcasting in stereo from our transmitter approximately 8 kilometers northwest of our studio in downtown Salmon Arm.
It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon of May 12th, 2014, and it's a rather special day, as you're going to find out. You're listening to What, So What on the Voice at CKVS 93.7 FM. I am your host, Jerre Paquette, co-author of the book Eat to Save Your Life. Normally, What, So What features discussions about food, the people who grow and distribute it, and its links to our health and well-being. Today, however, is a special day, as I said. It's the 22nd anniversary of the International Day of Awareness for 3 disabling illnesses: myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is often known as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and multiple chemical sensitivity. In some places, Gulf War syndrome and Lyme disease are also recognized on May the 12th. I want to reiterate that this is the 22nd year of the International Awareness Day, yet the world, including Salmon Arm, remains largely unaware of the nature of those diseases and their impact on those who suffer from them. Because time is short, my guest and I will focus on just 2 of these illnesses, fibromyalgia and myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. We're just going to call it ME/CFS for short, because although I practice the word over and over, I've run out of capacity for it. We are talking about fibromyalgia and ME/CFS together today because they often occur together. If you'd also like to hear, and maybe even participate in a show on multiple chemical sensitivity, Lyme disease, and Gulf War syndrome, please write me at dj@voiceoftheshoeswap.ca and let me know. But first, let me remind you, as I always do, of the opportunities for you to participate in the pleasures and contributions of local community radio, putting you in touch with ideas and people and possibilities you may not even know are part of your everyday life. For those of you interested in a volunteer-run radio station, we invite you to visit our website at voiceoftheshoeswap.ca for ways in which you can get directly involved. And while there, don't miss the opportunity to look over our diverse list of programs. And let me remind you, too, that none of our shows on The Voice, CKVS 93.7 FM, are possible without those who sponsor them. What, So What is privileged to be sponsored by DeMille's Farm Market. DeMille's Farm Market is a 3rd-generation family farm with roots in California farming, both vegetable and dairy. The family moved to the Salmon Arm area valley in 1970. In Salmon Arm, Roger DeMille discovered an oasis filled with the promise of nature's bounty, a humble beginning including 10 rows of sweet corn, a roadside stand, and an illegal sign. It was a hit. Year 2 saw expansion into 20 rows of corn and a small variety of vegetables. The rest is history, and history tells us that if it's grown locally, DeMille's will have it fresh for you. Well, there's an awful lot to discuss and share today, so we're going to have to get right to it. In spite of 22 years of drawing attention to fibromyalgia and ME/CFS, sadly, there is still very little that's known about them, either by the medical community or the public at large. Yet, these debilitating illnesses are on the rise, and individual sufferers and their families remain largely on their own. There are more patients impacted by fibromyalgia and ME/CFS than many other better-known conditions, including Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, lung cancer, and HIV/AIDS. Estimates are a little all over the map, but the most recent credible numbers estimate that 2 to 3% of the general population has fibromyalgia, and that's a lot. And it means that in Canada, about 1 million patients have it and struggle to survive it. Let's bring those figures closer to home. Here in Salmon Arm, with a population of about 17,000, some 500 people and their families may well be suffering from the ravages of fibromyalgia. 500. And about 0.5% of the population have ME/CFS, which means about 85 people and their families in Salmon Arm struggle with that disease. So here in Salmon Arm, about 585 people have one or both illnesses. In Greater Vancouver, with a population of about 2.5 million, these patients would overflow the Rogers NHL hockey arena. That is, if they could get there. These patients include all age groups, including children, all racial ethnic groups, and all socioeconomic strata. And finally, more women than men, more girls than boys, suffer from fibromyalgia and ME/CFS. Despite these numbers and the enormous suffering that patients and their families endure, the illnesses are not well researched or well understood, and there is no known cause, no specific treatment, and therefore no cure. In fact, there is still very little medical support at all available to patients, leaving them and their families to suffer in isolation. Dreams are shattered, social engagement opportunities disappear and are replaced by isolation, and hope is replaced by despair. So here we are today, participating in the 22nd International Day of Awareness in a collective attempt to change all that. You are listening to The Voice on CKVS 93.7 on your FM dial. We are joined in the studio in Salmon Arm on this day by one of the millions of patients worldwide who has fibromyalgia and ME/CFS. She is Carole Jeffries, a resident of Blind Bay and my wife. Carole is not an expert on the illnesses, fibromyalgia or ME/CFS, unless you consider 13 long years of suffering from both these diseases a measure of expertise. Carole is here to help focus on a very personal level our awareness and understanding of fibromyalgia and ME/CFS. As you'll come to understand, her presence and participation is an act of commitment and considerable courage, because there are many risks involved for such patients, including just climbing the stairs to get into the studio and sustaining a discussion. To help her journey through our discussion, we will first discuss fibromyalgia and then listen into a clip from a presentation in which a mother of 2 children suffering from ME/CFS speaks to a committee at the Institutes of Medicine in the USA. So welcome, Carole.
Hello, Jerry. Thank you for having me.
It's fun. And thank you for joining me today. The first time you've been able to visit our studio, because you have not been in any condition to get here.
It is. It's wonderful to see it.
And we're just lucky today.
Yeah.
First, I'd like to ask you to give us a personal perspective on fibromyalgia before we listen to the tape or the file. What is it? How has it impacted your life and mine?
Well, I think we probably should start with a medical definition of fibromyalgia so that people who don't know become more aware of what it is. Fibromyalgia is a disorder characterized by widespread musculoskeletal pain, accompanied by fatigue, sleep, memory problems, and mood issues. And that source is the Mayo Clinic. It's a nice little pithy definition that you'll see doesn't really cover it very well. There's also a range of associated conditions such as migraine headaches, myofascial pain, irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety or depression, Lyme disease, thyroid disease, autoimmune diseases, joint hypermobility where the people's joints dislocate easily or they don't hold a chiropractic treatment very well, orthostatic intolerance where the heart can't pump blood when the person is standing up, which means they faint in the line at the grocery store or at the bank, Raynaud's syndrome where fingers and toes turn blue, and there's just a whole range of others, and many of these also occur with ME/CFS.
Now, you have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. How did it start for you? How did you come to know that you had something like it?
Well, it started in kind of an insidious way. First of all, I couldn't sleep, and sleep still remains an enormous issue. But at the time, I would go to bed and I would still be awake at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, often going to work on 1 or 2 hours sleep, or maybe no sleep at all. Wasn't upset, wasn't lying awake, worrying or ruminating about things. I just couldn't sleep. I was wide awake. And then my feet started to hurt, not back in the heels where people get plantar fasciitis, but up on the soles of the feet. And I remember being in New Orleans together in 2001, and I could hardly walk through the French Quarter because my feet were so sore. And that caused my doctor to check me for multiple sclerosis, because that can be a hallmark sign of multiple sclerosis, is sore soles of the feet. But from there, the pain progressed up into my shoulders and my back. We thought maybe something was wrong with my chair at work. I got a new ergonomic chair. And then eventually the pain got into my joints, where it really became a problem. It felt like my joints had all been broken. And just coincidentally, I fell and broke my elbow in 2007. And I understand that's quite a painful break, but that was nothing compared to fibro pain. Nothing.
Now, this joint pain, is that a function of inflammation, like so many pains of the joints are? Well,
apparently not. There's not any inflammation found typically, and that there doesn't seem to be any deterioration of the joints as a result of the fibro. But for some reason, there's just this excruciating pain, which may indicate an immune system problem, may indicate a neurological problem with the central nervous system and the transmission of pain or the perception of pain. Doctors really just don't know what it is, but we do know as patients that even a hug hurts. It feels like somebody giving you a hug. It feels like one of the BC Lions football players has given you a bear hug and broken all your ribs. It's very, very painful. It's painful to breathe. It's painful to walk. And I ended up to the point where I would be screaming at night after a day at work because I was in so much pain. My doctor could find no painkiller, over-the-counter or prescription drug that worked at all until a semi-retired 85-year-old GP said, well, desiccated thyroid medication often works for the pain. Now, that's not regular thyroid medication known as Synthroid. It's desiccated thyroid.
This is something people should be writing down at this point, isn't it? To talk to their doctors about the different kinds of relief. Desiccated thyroid.
It doesn't work for everybody, but I was one of those people who it did work for, and the pain was gone in about 10 days. It was just a miracle, and it's never come back. But by then, I had suffered for about 9 months. I had been to about a dozen doctors. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. And it was this little country semi-retired doctor who said, you've got fibromyalgia, and here's a possible treatment for the pain, and it worked. And naturopaths will know probably more about desiccated thyroid than an MD, because desiccated thyroid was used back in the 50s by the medical community to treat thyroid disease. And it's since fallen out of favor for the synthetics, but it's the desiccated thyroid from pigs that does work for some people, but not all. I'd say give it a try. You'll know in 10 days whether it's going to work or not.
So you've given us enough already to indicate some measure of how confusing this disease is.
Oh, yeah.
How does a patient who starts out maybe something like you did with an ailment in the body that becomes another ailment, that becomes another one, how do they talk to their doctors about it to get the attention they need? Well,
I would say until you know what's wrong, it's very, very hard. It's very hard. You go into your doctor and you say, I have this pain, I have migraines. I had migraines every day that were just unrelenting, would not respond, and emergency room nurses will tell you that some of them have never seen unremitting pain. And sometimes the patients are so ill with the pain that they have seizures and pass out. I never had that, fortunately, but the pain was excruciating. And my doctor believed me. Not all do. But he believed me, and he searched, but he never did. It was the other doctor who found the pain cure. But the migraine headaches were unbelievable. So until I got that diagnosis, it was very difficult to talk to him. I hurt. I'm losing energy. I used to hike and dance and weight train. Now I can't walk around the block. And I'd walk 3, maybe 4 houses of distance, maybe, a couple hundred yards, and I'd fall and I couldn't get up. And you'd have to go to the car and shovel me into the car like a bag of water and drive me home. So, unless your doctor knows, or unless somebody says, hey, check out fibromyalgia, or somebody says it, it's pretty hard. But once you have that diagnosis, then you can start researching. Then you can start talking to your doctors credibly. Then you can say, well, I've read this book or this piece of published literature in the medical journals. What do you think of this? And then you have a respectful interchange with your doctor. But my doctor said to me years ago, Carole, you know more about fibromyalgia and ME/CFS than I do.
And we since moved from Calgary, where you became familiar with the doctor with you, and he took an interest in you. You had to find another doctor. So how did you do that, and how would you recommend to other people who are listening in for them to find a doctor who would be open to fibromyalgia as a diagnosis?
Well, I think that's partly why we're here today. I think it is becoming more known in the medical community and outside. But it's why we're here today. We need to bring awareness to the medical community so that when someone comes in presenting with all these symptoms, because there is no diagnostic test, on a blood test, I was as healthy as a 35-year-old, even though I was 49 years old. And I said to my doctor, then why do I feel like I'm 92? And, we laughed, but we had no answer. When we got the diagnosis, a lot of things changed. Not that I had a treatment, a cure, but for me, I had a treatment that helped, and that made a big difference. So
a lot of people in looking for a doctor, I want to dwell on it for a moment, because this is a community of people coming and going, are afraid to tell a doctor that he or she doesn't know enough to treat the disease. How do you approach the doctor? Well,
once you kind of know, or at least you suspect, then you can do some research. I went to my doctor with a couple of published articles and a couple of credible books by MDs, because MDs and the published medical literature speak the doctor's language, which means the doctor is able to understand. It's also fairly succinct, which is helpful when the doctors are so time crunched. And it also gives the doctor the comfort of another medical opinion to begin the treatment that another doctor has used and that they find has worked. So the credibility in many ways has to come back to the patient, or in my case, you came with me, and I have the great fortune of being married to a man with a PhD, so you're kind of a research nut anyway, and that's helpful. And so we just went in and had a good conversation with the doctor. I have to say, when I switched doctors moving here, I was terrified to lose my Calgary doctor. And it took me a year to come out here because I was scared. But by some serendipities, I found a wonderful doctor here who has changed none of my treatment. I was very afraid of having the apple cart upset. But he hasn't changed any of my treatment, and I remain kind of the same as I was before I left my other doctor, and that was helpful. Again, I took him a book by a local expert on ME/CFS who's in Vancouver, and I took him some published literature, and I took 2 handbooks that have been developed, the Canadian consensus documents, one for ME/CFS and one for fibromyalgia. He had never seen any of it, which is not uncommon, but I left it with him to read, and he's just been a great guy ever since. Just a great guy.
So the support is there. People tend to assume that they're not going to get any, there's going to be a lot of resistance, but it's not necessarily the case. You have to make the effort. But your point is, go in with helpful things for the doctor, get things that are in his language, because it's the anecdotal language that is difficult for him to receive, especially in the short exchanges you have with the doctor.
Yes.
I want to just say that at the end of the program, I'll remind people, but I know you've got an awful lot of research that you've used, and some of it I know you're willing to share with people.
Absolutely.
We can't refer to it during the hour, but if listeners, if you wish to find some of this research or get some of it from Carole, because she has spent, I got to tell you, an awful lot of hours finding the most credible kinds of research available, you can write me again at dj at voiceoftheshoeswap.ca. Send me an email. Your return address will be there, of course, and I will send you some of the files that Carole has dug up and other information that we'll refer to during the show.